Welcome to Extender Developer Training, Part 1. Many of you know Extender as a platform of choice to configure and customize Sage 300. There are many use cases of Extender that don't require Python code, and this is covered in separate training. We will start with an overview of Extender's architecture. Today's presentation will then focus on getting started with Extender Developer and Python scripts to customize Sage 300. Depending on your background with development and with Sage 300, there are many different resources available to get started. We will then go through how to use the module screen and how to create custom tables. We will then share foundations and best practices for writing in Extender scripts. The focus of this first session is on concepts in Extender and Sage 300, best practices and background on how it works, rather than building full scripts. The following sessions will then focus on specific scripts and apps for Extender and Sage 300. The training is particularly geared at consultants implementing Extender Developer Edition, as we will cover how Extender Developer works in detail. We also hope that developers with experience in Python and/or Sage 300 but new to Extender will learn best practices to use Extender as efficiently, as well as learn some troubleshooting tips. Although we will share concepts relating to Sage 300 screens and views that are useful in the context of Extender, this is not a Sage 300 SDK course, nor is it a full Python course. You can contact Sage directly for additional resources on the Sage 300 SDK, and we also suggest that developers with limited knowledge of Python follow one of the many Python online courses. But first, I will hand over to Anne for an overview of Extender's architecture.
Thanks, Natalie. Before we look at the architecture of Sage 300 and Extender, we'll do a quick recap on the functionality provided by Extender. The Configurator Edition allows you to add functionality to your Sage 300 site. You can alert people via email or creating a note when events occur. You can log when records change or specific fields change, or when records are inserted into the Sage 300 views or any third-party Sage 300 view that is created in the SDK. You can also add workflows to master file records being created or being updated, or batches being posted, or documents like orders and purchase orders being activated. And you can call or start a custom program, which is typically used for integration. The Developer Edition allows you to customize Sage 300 business logic and third-party business logic as well if it's created through the SDK. You can add additional validations or default values, or you could automate processes. You can also customize the Sage 300 Classic VB screens. You can add fields, buttons, and automate processes further. You can create new screens as part of your own application and create new tables with the associated business logic or view logic for those tables. You can also create integrations to other Sage 300 company databases when you want to share data to other systems or indeed to cloud systems. And you can use Extender with ORCID's modules like Process Scheduler, where you can schedule time-based alerts or workflows to be started or progressed. You can share information across systems using ORCID Notes. And now let's look at how Extender does this. If we first look at the Sage 300 architecture, in the middle we have the database. So that is your company database. And surrounding that are the business logic or the views, and all access to the database goes through the views. So it maintains the integrity of, for example, the customer record or the invoice record. And then around that we have the classic screens, so that's the VB screens, which allow you to read and write and update the different views, and therefore through to the database. We also have the web screens, the Sage 300 web screens and third-party web screens like EFT processing that still access the business logic or views, which then in turn access the database. And you also have the common utilities, the API, the import and export, the SDK, the web services, and macros. So all of these different access methods go through the business logic to access the database. Using Extender with the Configurator Edition, Extender wraps a layer around the business logic or views. It allows you to do alerts and notifications, which are triggered by changes in the views. So Extender is monitoring the view logic, and then is it triggering the alerts and notifications, or triggering the logging, who changed what, when, and where, or starting the workflows themselves. And then using the Developer Edition, you can create your own custom processes and screens, and you can tailor the VB screens, the classic screens. And we're working on being able to amend the web screens. So Extender Developer Edition uses Python to enable you to write your own custom screens or processes or apps, and to tailor the existing VB screens. And it also allows you to amend or add to the underlying business logic. So you are able to customize the Sage 300 business logic, for example, doing validations, defaults, or automations, but it is at the view level. So your customizations will work. For example, if you made a certain field mandatory, the customization will work whether the data is being updated through the classic screens, through the web screens, through your own custom processes, or through the SDK, the import-export, the web services, or a macro, because the customizations sit at the business logic level. And it allows you to create your own tables or views. So a view is the custom logic that you need to update and maintain your table. Extender also allows you to execute external applications or to have real-time integration with external systems. The benefits of using Extender and Python are that Python is an open source language which is widely used, and there's thousands of well-tested libraries that you can use with your Sage 300 installation. The customizations are done in Python in the scripted version of Python, and they're stored in the database. So this means it gives you a very flexible scenario, because the customizations can be imported company by company and can be amended on site without the use of a compiler. It's cost effective because it supports all the standard Sage 300 tools like upgrading and dumping and loading. And because when you add tables, the data dictionary is maintained, all reporting tools that see your other Sage 300 data will see your new tables in the same way. Because the source code is visible, it's transparent. And because the source code is in the company database, it is self-documenting, it is backed up when the company database is backed up, and it facilitates site management.
Thanks, Anne. Now let's look in practice at some general considerations when you're starting to implement Extender in Sage 300. First, does Extender have an impact on performance? This is a pretty common question. And while Extender itself doesn't fundamentally impact the performance of Sage 300, however, when you're designing scripts, you need to follow some best practices, in particular using the right indexes when reading Sage 300 records. In the latest Extender product updates, we have introduced 2 new features that enhance performance of Sage 300 with Extender, and that is the ability to share a Python environment across multiple scripts, as well as the ability to choose whether you want to remember original values of view fields or not. In prior versions, this was done automatically in case a script or workflow needed the original value of a view field. While for most sites it doesn't make a visible difference, on sites with large volumes of orders, for example with many lines and several scripts attached to the order entry detail views, this may make a large difference. And we will review the specifics of how to do this in subsequent advanced training. Secondly, we're often asked, does Extender work with the web screens? The view scripts work on the web screens. The workflow starts on records that are updated on the web screens. However, at the moment, any screen customizations and screens that require a UI do not run on the web screens. They only run on the Sage desktop screens. It's also important to note that if you are writing a script and it's going to be used on the web screens, you can't display message boxes. So you need to take into consideration a few things when writing your scripts. Also, as we've mentioned in the introduction, Extender works with other ORCID modules. For example, you can write a script to save PDF files of invoices or purchase orders for use in Document Management Link. You can also use Extender to write your own workflow action scripts. And you can also write scripts that are going to be run in Process Scheduler without a user intervention, and scripts that are displayed in Information Manager notes. Again, this is a fundamental part of using Extender, but we will cover that in the second part of the training. So let's start with the first thing that you generally do when you have Extender, which is to activate it. When you activate Extender in a new database, it creates a VR record in the CS app table. So let's now have a look at what happens in Sage 300 when I activate. After I've activated Extender, we now have a VR record in the CS app table, and we can set up security groups for Extender. Because Extender's two-letter code is VI, it is at the bottom of the list, and I can create groups for users who will be viewing logs, setting up Extender, and specifically for Extender Developer, users who can view and edit custom table records. We'll look at that in a bit more detail later. As you can see from the overview, Extender can be used in many scenarios, and there's a range of resources to get started depending on your own knowledge of Sage 300 and Python and other programming skills. And the relevant resources for a specific project will depend on the exact requirements you're trying to achieve. Your first point of call is the Extender help, which you can access from the ORCID website under Resources. So here I've got help for all the modules, and I can go and select the Extender help with links to the training videos and different key topics to get started. There are many online resources for Python specifically, as it is one of the most common programming languages currently used. And here we've highlighted some resources to get started with Python. You can import Python libraries and packages in a script, and we will look at examples of that in the advanced training sessions. By default, in the latest product updates, Extender installs with Python 3.8.8, and this is particularly relevant for developers who want to use Python packages that only support more recent versions of Python. And you can see this in Extender options. You see the Python version that is being used. We regularly ask if you can use an IDE to develop Python scripts for Extender and debug. We are aware that some partners have used IDE, but we're not in a position to demonstrate that to you at the moment. However, we find that the online debugging tools is very useful, in particular when you get started with Python for basic syntax errors. And we've got the link here, and we'll look at an example of using this a bit later. Extender sample scripts are available on the ORCID website in the section that is available only for registered Sage 300 business partners. Sample scripts are designed for training purposes as a starting point to develop your own custom scripts. So they need to be reviewed and tested by a technical resource with a good understanding of the actual Sage 300 setup that you are implementing it in. When you install Extender, you also have access to some documentation that is installed in your Sage program folder. So Extender is installed in the VI 69A folder, and within there I have a doc folder. This includes a whole lot of content on the controls and classes and functions that can be used in Extender. So you can open any of the topics and then you can see the functions that can be used. So we were discussing earlier whether Extender runs on the web screens. You can use this function, which returns false if you're using the desktop screens and true if you are using the web screens. And just a little tip there, while searching is not enabled in those, if you actually use a text editor like Notepad++, you can search in files and you can choose a particular directory. So you can actually search through all the files. When you start with Extender, there's two main components to get familiar with. One is Python, and we've looked at some resources for this. The other one is the Sage 300 Software Development Kit and Views. To assist with the views, we have a component of Extender called View Info, which you can get to from Extender Inquiries menu, View Info. When you first open View Info, Extender will read all the views that are active in that database and show them in here. So for example, if we look at AR, we can see all the different views / tables used in Sage 300. And for example, let's look at AR Customer. And the really important things in View Info when writing Extender scripts is well, there are three important things. One is here it shows you all the views that are composed with the AR Customer view, so the views that are related to AR Customer. We have a list of the indexes or the keys, and that comes in particularly handy when you are trying to read data into Sage 300. To one, make sure you retrieve the right record, and two, to make sure you're not having a negative impact on the performance. And then you can see all the different fields, the data type, the field length, and for fields that have selection lists, you can see the different values and what they mean. You can now right-click and copy and then paste it into Notepad++ or into Excel if you're trying to work with the field names. And you can also use F5 and the Finder. And for example, let's take our favorite customer, 1200, Mr. Ronald Black. And now I can see here the initial values for Mr. Ronald Black. So that's a feature of the Sage 300 SDK that we have incorporated in Extender to make it easier. Just a reminder that when you are trying to automate a process, it is often very useful to record a macro, and then that will in many cases indicate the views that are used, and this is also particularly useful when printing reports through Extender. The macro will tell you exactly the parameters of the report, the name of the printer if you're actually printing to a printer, and these values you actually need to incorporate into your Extender script. Once you've looked at all the resources that are available for Extender and worked out what you want to do with Extender, often the starting point is going to be to use the module screen. The module in Extender is a way to group all your customizations that include your logging events, your message templates, your scripts, your custom tables. And the purpose of using a module is that it makes it easier to deploy between your test site, your UAT site, your live site. So we'll have a look at how to import and export modules, and also how you can disable a module from the module screen. So in Extender Setup on the module screen, when you first install, you have access to one module, which is the workflow module, which includes all the default workflow action. Create a new module. I'm going to insert a row, give it a name. You can add a description, put in a date, a website, version, and the ID. The ID is the most important part of the Extender module, as any component that you want to add to that module needs to include the ID. In this case, I'm going to call it ORCID Webinar. On the module screen, I can see everything that is included in the module, including I can double click here to open the extender script. And if I want to add a new script, I'll just insert a row here and call it. It's prompting me to create it. If I close this screen, I can see now the script is now attached to this module. I can add some events, like you've seen in the configurator training video on how to do logging and email alerts. I can add message templates, which are relevant for workflow. And then I can attach scripts to views and create a custom table. So Anne will show us how to do that very shortly. So once I've added all my elements to the module, I can export, save it into a particular folder or just a default folder if I want. And then in another database, I can click import and import that module. I can use the disable button, but remember, disable only will disable view scripts. And to disable a screen script, you need to rename it, and we'll look at that a bit later when we get started with scripts. So now I will hand over to Anne to go through creating custom tables.
Thanks, Natalie. In the next exercise, we're going to create a new table. And the intention or the purpose of this table is to have extra data associated with the customer shipped to records. When you create a table through Extender, Extender adds the table definition and field definition to Sage's data dictionary, so it is available for the Sage report object. And the table is also available for the dump and load and the upgrade. When you create a table, you need to stick to Sage's convention that the table name cannot be longer than 8 characters long, and this must include the 2-letter module ID. So if you want to keep all your tables associated with Extender, you would start with them as VI. Each table has an associated view ID, and we would recommend that you leave the view ID blank, because Extender will generate the next view ID up that's available starting at 7000, so VI 7000. So this means when you import a table definition into a new company, you won't accidentally have the same view ID. The next available one will just be allocated. The description is used at the top of the screen for your data entry. And all the field types that the Sage 300 SDK supports are supported. So that includes text, date, time, number, integer, 16-bit or 32-bit, and a Boolean. And we'll see you can create drop-down lists with values. You can mask fields to uppercase or mask fields so that you can't see the value on the screen, used for passwords. For your fields that can have finders, you can define the finder field, for example, the customer ID, and which field to display back as the description, like Mr. Ronald Black. And you can filter finders. So in this example here, the ship to finder will be filtered by their custom ID that's on the screen. And then before you create a table, you need to define the keys. And then we'll look at how to add records and how to import records. To create a table, you can either create the table in the module screen with the associated module, in this case ext dev train, or you can use the custom table screen and create the table there. So the module screen shows all the associated elements with the particular module, and on the table screen we can double click to add a new table. Let's just make the screen a little wider. So our table name is going to be VIEXDETR for Extender's development training. But we want it associated with the module. So we're going to start off with the module ID and then the table name. Sage has a limitation that a table name can only be 8 characters long. If you make it longer, you'll get an error message. By convention, you normally use the first 2 letters of your module code for your table name so that there will be no conflict. Give it a description, and this is used on the top of the screen. The view ID we would typically leave blank, and it will assign the next available view ID to this table. So when you export this module from database A and import it into database B, it will get the next available view ID in that database. And then you come to define the fields. Key fields first. So in our case, the first two fields are going to form the key. The customer ID, which is text. The description is what displays on the screen, and we make it the same size as the customer ID. And we want a finder on this, so we can use the finder to choose the customer. So we'll just filter for those starting with AR and find the customer view. And the field, this is the field that we're going to be keying this view on, so it'll be the customer ID. And the description field is the field that we want to display back, so we know we've chosen the right customer. And in our case, we'll use the name of the customer. The second field will be the ship to code, also text, the label, the size, and the finder. So we want to have a finder on the customer's ship to. The finder field. And in this case, we want to filter this finder to only show ship to records which belong to the customer we have selected. So ID cust, which is the field in the finder, must equal our field called ID cust. And the description field to display back the location name. And then we're going to have location description, which is text of 60 and a location type. And this one's going to be an integer, a 16-bit integer, because it's just going to have 4 or 5 values, so it doesn't need to be a long one. And here's the case where it's a good idea to work on the detail screen because we can fill in the values. So 0 is going to represent the home office, 1 is the sales office, 2 is the office and warehouse, 3 is the warehouse only, and 4 is going to be a pop-up store. Then we're going to have the sales date, that's going to be a date, sales start time, and the sales budget, which is going to be 10 long with 2 decimal places. Then we're going to have the user ID for the salesperson at that location. And here we want to make it 12 characters long. But we want to provide a mask so that whatever they type in, it's going to be uppercase. So left justified is the minus sign, 12C is uppercase. So these are all the standard masks that Sage use in their SDK on their screens, and you can use any of those. And the last one is the password, which is going to be 60 long. And in this case, we want to just mask it on the screen so people can't see it. And to do that, you type in password into the list values. And before we add the table, we need to define the keys. So our key number 1 is going to be our key 1. Whether or not we allow duplicate records, we only want 1 record per customer and ship to. And the keys of the field in our case is ID cust and ID ship to. And we can go ahead and add that. And now we can either go ahead and add records to the table from here by going Open Table Editor, or we can use the Table Editor screen. Here we choose the table load it, and now we see we've got our finder to our customers. And when we click on the Ship To Finder, it is filtered for those ship tos belonging to customer 1200. We have our drop-down values, a date, a time, the sales budget, the user ID. So even if I type this in lowercase, it's masked to uppercase, and the password is masked. And if we want to import data into that table, we can go to the custom table editor and go File, Import Records, and it will import records for the currently selected table.
We've now created a module, we've created a custom table, and we're ready to dive into Extender scripts, which are really the core of what you do with Extender Developer. There are different types of scripts. First, some scripts that you can just run. They will either open a UI or you run them and they actually do something in the background. You have scripts that you add to screens, so they would be adding a button to the AR customer screen, adding optional fields to screens. You can have view scripts that are triggered whenever a record in Sage 300 is updated or inserted through the view. So we'll look at these different types of scripts. And when you create a new script in the script screen, depending on how you name your script, you will have a different shell representing the different types of scripts. We'll show you how to select your own editor, how to rename the script if required, and how to add a script to the desktop for scripts that you might want to run. When you add a script to Extender, it is saved in the database. When you want to make a change to it, you need to check it out and do your changes. It's only when you check it back into the database that all the other users will use the newer version of the script. We will have a look at how we're deploying scripts. We have discussed modules. There is no need to copy any file on a server or the user's workstation. Once it is uploaded in the database, Extender, when it needs the file, will save it in the user's temp directory. Running the scripts depends also on the type of script. So a view script is triggered whenever the view is used. So on the web screens, on the desktop screens, when a macro is used, when a third party connects to the view, when Sage CRM updates the AR customer record. A screen script is runs whenever the actual screen that you're subclassing is open. And if you have a script that is not attached to a screen or to a view, you just want to run it, you can run it from the script screen or by adding it to the desktop. So let's look at that and start with our Hello World sample. So we're going to create a new script and add some comments, have a look at the acpack.py and add a message box. We're going to add this script to the module. We've actually already added that script to the module. So now, if I right click on the script, I can choose Select Editor and point to where my favorite editor is installed. In this case, I am using Notepad++. So I'm going to select it here. Say OK. And next time I'm going to view or edit the script, it will open it in Notepad++. Well, first let's run it. If I click Run, it opens a default screen script. And that is because I included UI in the script name. So now I can right click, and if I want to edit that script, I would need to check it out. But I can also choose Edit, and Extender will check it out for me. Now our default script does not have any comment. So what I'm going to do is at the top of the script using hash and add some comments to what this script is about. And this is particularly useful, as you can see the first few lines of that script in the script screen. It's good to put instructions on how this script is used there. Most functions and classes that you can use in a script come from the acpack.py, which is in your VI folder. So here I've got the acpac.py. You can open it in Notepad++ and have a look at the different functions and classes that are documented in the doc folder. So here what we're doing is just creating a screen, and we are using the new feature called layout. And again, we will cover that in more detail in the second part of this of the Extender Developer training. You can see that we've added some menu as well. So let's run the script. See, I've got a menu there which shows a message box. So show message box is an important way to display feedback to the users, and should only be used on scripts that are actually attached to a UI, either your own or an existing Sage desktop screens. So I've checked it out. If I change, do a change here, I'm going to save the file that I've changed, close this, and I'm going to run it again. And I can see my change. However, because I haven't checked it in, if another user was running this same script, they would still see the original version. So now, let's say I'm happy with the changes I've done. I can check it in to commit it to the database, or I can undo checkout and my change will be lost. So in this case, I'm going to choose check-in. So the status is now checked in, and all users now have access to the new version of the script. It is generally recommended that you check them in or undo the checkout on a regular basis. When you check out a script, a copy is made in your user's temp folder under a directory per company and a subdirectory per user. Now this is only used at runtime and for checkout and is all managed by Extender. You don't need to copy files yourselves in those temp folders directly. In some cases, for example, when you are running web applications like AutoSimpli barcodes that run using IIS, if the user configured in IIS does not have access to its own temp directory, you may need to change some registry setting on the current user Extender to configure where the scripts are cached. In my case, I've saved it to ctemp Extender scripts. Now generally you don't need to do that. You would only do that if you have some specific security issues to access each user's temp folder. And I can choose to add the script to the desktop. So we'll add a link to the Sage 300 desktop. I can put it in any of the existing menu, or if you want to create your own menu, you need to actually insert the menu name here. I'm going to call it Hello World, and it's going to go into the Extender training menu. Because this updates the group dat file, I need to restart the Sage desktop, as this file is only refreshed when I first log into Sage. So let's do that quickly. Now I have an Extender training menu and I have my script here. When I double click on it and run it, my script opens. And if I have a look at my module screen, under the menu items tab, I can see that it's created this new entry on the desktop, and within that desktop folder it actually has added that icon for that screen. Note that this applies to all users, so if you only wanted certain users to have access to this script, or to be able to run the script, you need to do the validation at the start of the script to say, show a message to the users to say they can't run it. To add more functionality to our scripts, we're going to start looking at using the sample scripts. Sample scripts are available on the ORCID website. 2 registered Sage 300 business partners. You can download some are scripts, some are modules. You can download them. If it's a module, you can import the module and start testing, configure it and testing. If it is a script, you upload it to the database. Depending on what it is, you may have to attach it to a view script or just restart the Sage desktop. And we can look at 2 examples. First one is a custom script to edit records in a single custom table. And then we'll look at a view script to validate field in AR Customer. In my first example, I have a module where I have created a custom table called NPS Cust to actually track the NPS Net Promoter Score by customer. And while I can use the custom table editor to enter record, I just wanted a screen that was, a bit nicer. So for this, I'm going to go to the ORCID website, into the Resources Extender Scripts area, and searching on General Python samples, I can see a custom screen template. I can download it and save it on my machine. I can then upload the script. This one is just a script. I'm going to upload it from the Extender Script section. And now, because I want it to be part of my module, I can actually rename the script there. When you're renaming a script on the script screen, you get this warning. Just as a reminder, if you have used that script in another script, you might want to check that you've updated all the elements that actually use that script name. So now, as we've seen before, I can check it out. I'm going to edit the script, which opens it in Notepad++, and I can change the table name to the table that I want to use. In this example, it's easier to look at this from the module screen. My table is called orcid.nps.npscust. So I can copy that name there. Save this. And now you can run this script. And I've changed the table names in that sample script. Come back here, I can check it in. Now if I run this script, I can edit custom records, but only save. I can add another record. And that is only for this particular custom table. Next sample script we're going to look at is validating a field. So I'm going to download this. Now our second example, validate script, that we want to attach to the state field on the AR customer, we're going to upload it straight from View Event Scripts and Workflow. So this is a view script that will stop us from saving a record if the value isn't correct. To create a new view script, I can click on this all views, and then I can find my view. Now I'm looking for something which includes customer, and that's my AR0024 AR customer. If I want to check the field name, I can actually click on that finder here, and I want a field where the description contains state, because I want to attach my script to validate the customer state, and I can see that it's now called code STTE. So I can copy that. So on the script, I can insert a row, use F6 to upload the script, or use the finder if it's already there. And the instructions here at the top of the script tell me what I need to do. So for parameter 1, I put the field name that I want to validate. In parameter 2, I'm going to paste the valid values. If I want to allow a blank value, we've configured this script to let you use blank as a valid value. And then this particular customer only sells in California, Texas and Illinois. So I'll just type in the value that are relevant. If I save this, as I'm saving it, Extender does two things to subclass this view. First thing it does is create a new record in the CS app. As you can see here, I've got a script attached, or scripts attached to AR, so I've got a record in CS app for AR and VI. What it's also doing is updating the rotor.dat. As we can see in the VI folder here, we've got some new rotor entries, and you've got similar one in the shared data folder, in the VI69A folder, and that is particularly relevant if you have multiple installs of Sage 300 on multiple servers and or on workstations. We can now test that script. Select a customer and update the state. When I try and save it, it's telling me that this is not a valid value. If I leave it blank, that is deemed a valid value. If I enter one of the valid options, it lets me save. So we have mentioned in the introduction that yes, the view scripts work in the web screen. So typically for validation when saving a record. So if I open the AR customer on using the web screen for the same company, the script is imported. Find my customer, and we had a validation on the state field. So I'm going to try saving that New South Wales, and it's telling me that NSW is not a valid value for the state province field. So same error message, same validation applies on the web screen. Steps to set up this particular scripts are documented in the PDF that is attached to the script on the website. So we've looked at adding a view script to the AR customer screen, and because it's a validation script, we actually want to stop the process when the values aren't valid. We're using parameters to make the deployment easier, so you can change between different databases and users can maintain the valid values without having to change the script. Possible extensions and ways you can use this sample script is to link it to other views. Remember that you would need to have a think about the context in which you're adding it to the views, as the script was designed for a flat view such as AR customer. So when you're adding it to a more complex views like OE orders or OE credit notes, you may want to restrict it so that, for example, the script doesn't run, the validation doesn't run when you're processing a day end. You can also expand on that script so that it validates based on records in a custom table rather than just the parameters, and we will look at that in more advanced training sessions. The next type of script we're going to look at is what we call a subclass screen script. So basically it's when we are changing an existing Sage 300 screen. Such scripts need two things to be enabled. One is to include the rotor ID of the screen in the name, and also it needs to be in the first line of the script. So we're going to look at how to find the rotor ID. And also for most of these scripts you need to find out the control and the data source name that is used on that screen. And we can look at that using file customize as well as ACBAC info. And we'll do a simple example to rename fields on the AR customer screen. So let's go into Sage 300, and in the script screen We're going to create a new script. We're going to go and check the roto ID of the screen. I want to rename fields on the AR customer screen. So to find it, I can right click on the screen I want to use, look at the properties, and I can see here its ID, AR1300. So our new script needs to include AR1300 full stop in the name. I'm going to insert a new row. AR1300 is the screen ID. Yes, I want to create it. When I'm doing this, if I look at that script, you can see that the first line is hash AR1300. So Extender knows to change that particular screen on the desktop screens. So to enable this new script, I need to restart the Sage desktop. Let's do that quickly. So now, if you look at the structure of that screen, it's using this UI class to create the screen, and I need to know the control name. The simplest way to do that, in many cases, is to go to the screen you want to change and use File Customize, which is a Sage 300 function, and look at the controls. So for example, remove the delete button. As you can see, it's now gone on the screen. I select it, it's back. So that means my control name is app_delete_button. So now we know what the button name is. To find a control name, generally, we can also use acbackinfo.exe in the runtime folder. So if I'm going to run this, and I'm selecting the screen that I want, AR1300, and choose Get Info. At the top, I can see all the data sources that I used. This is also very useful in the next stage of these customizations, when we're going to be using the data source to do some automation and defaulting. So now I want to change the customer number and the customer name caption to call it member number and member name. So if I scroll down, I can see here customer name and customer number, and I've got my control name here. So I'm going to put that here. And to change the caption, I use the set caption function. Okay, so how do I know it is set caption? I can look at the doc folder, and a good starting point for screen scripts is the host control HTML. Double click on that, have access to a whole lot of function, including set caption. And it's telling me that I need to put the caption in a string in there. And a newish feature is, for example, I can set the color. Okay, now I also want to set the customer number field to member number. Save this file. Close the customer screen if it's already open, and I can run a script from here. I will open the AR1300 screen, so customer number, customer screen. You can see that my fields, customer number is now called member number, customer name is now called member name, and the member name caption is blue. When I'm happy with this, I can check it in, and it's now enabled for all users. We've looked at different types of scripts, so let's review a few things that are useful in the text editor that we're using, in this case Notepad++. First thing, particularly if your script looks like nothing is happening, check that the encoding is set to UTF-8. Sometimes if you're importing or saving, somehow the encoding might have changed. Python script needs to be encoded in UTF-8 to work in Sage 300. We have mentioned before that indentation is really important in Python. As you can see here, we can see that our sample script is using tab as the indenting. And it's possible in other text editors as well, but in Notepad++ you can choose a view show symbol, and you can see we've selected to show white space and tab, as well as show the indent guide. So this is particularly useful as indentation is not just to make your script clearer, but it is a key part of Python knowing how the flow of the functions works. You can use space or tabs for your indentation, but within a given script you can't mix and match. So a lot of our sample scripts use tab, so just be careful when you're copying them if you are set to use spaces. And you can change the tab or space settings in Settings, Preferences, Tab Setting. You can set the default, your tab size default to 4, replaced by space, and in Notepad++ you actually have an option that can apply specifically to Python. So in our case, we're not using the default value for Python, but we are using a tab of size 4. In this presentation, we've looked at an overview of what you can do with Extender Developer and its architecture, how Python, Extender and Sage fit together. We've discussed a range of resources to get you started with Extender, Python and Sage 300. Detailed how to use the module screen, how to create custom tables and update records using the custom table editor and importing. Discussed some concepts and foundations for writing Extender scripts, and looked at examples of a script that you can run from the Extender script screen that you can add to the Sage desktop, a screen script to rename fields, a view field to validate some fields in Sage 300 using the sample scripts on the ORCID website as well as the documentation in the Extender folder. The next part of the training will focus on more advanced topics, and we will be looking at using Sage views in scripts, adding fields to detail grids in Sage 300, adding optional fields to header, adding lines to orders using CS Query, printing reports, emailing, building some grids to process some records in bulk, writing some scripts to display ORCID notes, writing some scripts to run in Process Scheduler, and also using example of using Python libraries to connect to other systems. So hopefully you can join us for the Advanced Extender Developer training session. Thank you for your time.